The floor plating buckled where Sergeant Elias Thorne had been standing a fraction of a second prior. He rolled, the movement fluid and practiced, ignoring the scream of protest from his bruised ribs as he came up on the balls of his feet. Kalen roared, a sound like tearing metal, his massive four-armed frame casting a long, jagged silhouette across the arena lights. The alien was an absolute unit, a textbook apex predator designed by evolution for crushing bones and rending steel. The crowd, a kaleidoscope of species from 100 worlds, roared in a mix of bloodlust and horror. To them, this was a slaughter in the making. Thorne wiped a streak of blood from his cheek. His lungs burned, but his breathing remained rhythmic, controlled. He wasn't there to outmuscle a mountain. He was there to outlast it. They evolved for the sprint. We evolved for the marathon. 3 hours earlier, the grand hall of the Spire of Othela had been a swirl of polite conversation and refractive light, not sweat and ozone. It was the kind of high-stakes diplomatic venue where a spilled drink could start an interstellar war. Thorne stood near the perimeter, his dress uniform stiff, watching the Galactic Council mingle. He felt distinctly out of place. The other species were elegant, ancient, or terrifyingly powerful. Humanity was the new arrival, the species still trying to prove they belonged at the table among the stars. Then came Kylan. The Draxian warlord's scion moved through the crowd with the heavy, arrogant gait of one who has never known fear. He stopped before the Terran delegation, towering over the ambassador, and the room grew quiet. He sneered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Thorne's chest. He called humans soft. He laughed at the concept of the Terran spirit, calling it a bedtime story used to comfort a weak species. To Kalen, humans were barely worth the nitrogen they breathed. Certainly not fit for a military alliance with the hegemony. He looked like a villain from a pulp science fiction story, a caricature of violence, but the threat he posed was very real. He was one of the so-called Space Orcs, the Rim worlds feared, a death worlder built for pure kinetic fury. When Kalen questioned humanity's right to exist, the ambassador faltered. That was when Thorne stepped forward. He didn't shout, he didn't posture, he simply looked the giant in the eye. He relied on human ingenuity in the only way that mattered in that moment. He turned the alien's arrogance into a weapon. "If we are so frail," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the tension, "then you should have no trouble dismantling me." The challenge hung in the air, electric and sharp. Kalen laughed, a booming sound that rattled the crystal flutes on the serving trays. He looked at the small, unaugmented human and saw only prey. He expected a quick execution, a momentary distraction to prove his point. Thorne was planning a harsh lesson in asymmetric warfare. It was a classic sci-fi scenario, the underdog against the monster butt. Thorne knew physics didn't care about tropes. Physics cared about energy expenditure. As they moved to the arena, the whispers of HFY began to circulate on the human comms channels, a rally cry for the impossible. Back in the arena, Kalen launched another devastating haymaker. Thorne didn't block. He slipped the punch by millimeters, letting the massive fist slam into the barrier behind him. The impact shook the ground. Kalen was fast, but he was angry, and anger burned oxygen. Thorne checked his internal chrono. 4 minutes in. He just needed to survive 8 more. 9 minutes. That was the threshold where biology began to scream. Kalen was no longer a blur of kinetic energy. The warlord's scion was heaving, his massive chest expanding and contracting like a bellows. His movements, once snapping with the velocity of a whip, had degraded into sluggish, telegraphed swipes. The heat regulation of the Draxian physiology was failing. They were built for explosive bursts of violence, for ending a fight in seconds. They were not built for this. Thorne, conversely, was just warming up. Sweat slicked his skin, cooling him efficiently, a biological advantage that the galaxy often overlooked. This was the essence of persistence hunting. On the ancient plains of Earth, humans didn't run faster than the gazelle. They just ran until the gazelle's heart exploded. Thorne wasn't fighting a duel anymore. He was hunting. Victory belongs to those who refuse to break. Kalen roared, a sound lacking its earlier resonance, and lunged. It was a desperate, heavy blow meant to crush Thorne into the deck. This was the moment strategic patience paid its dividend. Thorne didn't retreat this time. He stepped inside the arc of the swing, moving into the danger zone with terrifying precision. The giant overextended, his weight shifting forward on tired legs. Thorn drops low, driving his shoulder into the alien's center of gravity, while simultaneously kicking hard against the inside of Kalen's primary knee joint. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. The mechanics of the leverage were undeniable. Kalen's leg buckled under his own immense mass. The apex predator of the Rimworld crashed to the arena floor, the impact vibrating through the boots of the stunned spectators in the front row. Before Kalen could scramble to recover, Thorn was there. He didn't strike to kill. Instead, he locked Kalen's secondary arm in a hold that threatened to dislocate the shoulder if the alien moved an inch. The arena went completely still. The Galactic Council looked on in disbelief. The small, soft human had not only survived the monster, he had dismantled him. "Do you yield?" Thorn asked. His voice wasn't a shout, but in the hush of the arena, it carried to the rafters. Kalen ceased his struggle. He looked up at the human, his alien eyes wide with a new emotion. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. He realized that the Terran spirit wasn't a myth about courage. It was a warning about endurance. "I yield," Kalen grunted, the words heavy with exhaustion. Thorn immediately released the hold. He stepped back and, defying every instinct of the watching crowd, extended a hand toward the fallen warlord. "Honor is found in the yield, not just the kill," Thorn said, quoting an old Draxian proverb back to the prince. Kalen stared at the hand, then up at Thorn. Slowly he reached out, his massive fingers engulfing Thorn's hand, and pulled himself up. The warlord stood, favoring his good leg, and turned to the stunned VIP box where the ambassadors sat frozen. "The humans," Kalen bellowed, his voice regaining its command. "Fight like demons. The hegemony will stand with them." The roar of the crowd was deafening, a mix of shock and admiration. Thorn looked up at the lights, adrenaline finally fading into a dull ache in his muscles. He had proven that while the galaxy might be full of monsters, humanity was the thing that kept running when the monsters got tired. The alliance was secure. The Deathworlders had found a pack worth running with.